The beginning of the end. Reginald Reggie Carter believed in balance. His days were structured, his habits predictable, and his patience legendary. As a middle school science teacher in Lakeland, Florida, he had no choice but to develop an iron will and a calm demeanor. Handling preteens who thought TikTok dances were more important than Newton's laws required a level of patience most adults couldn't comprehend. At home, Reggie valued the same peace he tried to instill in his students. His home, a modest but well-kept single-story brick house, was his sanctuary, a place where he could kick back, grade papers, and unwind after long school days. He wasn't one for drama, didn't meddle in neighborhood affairs, and certainly wasn't the type to start trouble. But trouble, it seemed, had parked itself right in his driveway. It started subtly. The first time Reggie noticed the silver Lexus RX blocking his driveway, he assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a delivery driver had parked there temporarily, or maybe someone visiting a neighbor had run out of room on the street. He wasn't the type to immediately assume the worst. Instead, he waited a bit, expecting the car to be moved. It wasn't. Annoyed but still rational, he walked up to the house next door, the luxurious two-story Spanish-style home that belonged to Blythe Vanderholt. He knocked, expecting a quick apology and for the car to be moved. Instead, Blythe greeted him with an expression of mild inconvenience, as if he were interrupting something important. She was in her mid-40s, blonde, perfectly manicured, and always dressed like she was about to attend a high-end brunch. "Reggie, what can I do for you?" she asked, her voice sweet but hollow. Reggie pointed back to his driveway. "Your car's in my driveway." Blythe blinked, then turned and peeked over his shoulder. "Oh, that. I just had a delivery and needed to make space for the truck to back up. I figured you wouldn't mind." Reggie kept his tone neutral. "I do mind. I'd appreciate it if you didn't park there." Blythe let out a light, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Reggie, don't be so dramatic. It was just for a moment." He wasn't the arguing type, so he let it go. But the problem was, it wasn't just for a moment. It became a pattern. Over the next week, Reggie found Blythe's car in his driveway 3 more times. Each time, she had an excuse. "Oh, I was just dropping something off inside." "Oh, my friend came over, and we ran out of space." "Oh, I was just stepping out for a second." No big deal. It was a big deal. Each time, Reggie calmly reminded her to stop. Each time, she waved him off like he was a child throwing a tantrum. It wasn't the act of parking in his driveway that got under his skin. It was her entitlement, her complete disregard for his repeated requests. The final straw came on a Wednesday evening. Reggie had endured a grueling day at school, dealing with students who had suddenly decided slime making was more important than their science quiz. He was exhausted, hungry, and looking forward to nothing more than collapsing on his couch and watching the game. But when he pulled into his street, there it was, the silver Lexus RX. Not only was it in his driveway again, but this time, it was angled in such a way that completely blocked access to his garage. Reggie parked on the street, took a deep breath, and walked up to Blythe's door with a newfound resolve. He knocked, harder than before. It took her a full minute to open the door. She was holding a glass of white wine, looking as if she had been in the middle of a relaxing evening. "Reggie," she said, her tone exasperated. "Again? What now?" Reggie pointed to the driveway. "Your car. Again." Blythe sipped her wine. "Oh, right. I meant to text you, but I figured you wouldn't mind. You usually park on the street anyway." He exhaled slowly, counting to 10 in his head. "Blythe, I've asked you multiple times. Stop parking in my driveway." She let out an amused laugh. "Reggie, come on. You're being a little ridiculous, don't you think?" "No, I'm not." She tilted her head, smirking. "It's just a driveway." Reggie took a step closer, his patience thinning. "No, it's my driveway. And I need you to stop." Blythe rolled her eyes and waved her hand. Fine, I'll move it. But Reggie wasn't so sure, because each time she had promised to stop, she never actually did. Something in her expression told him she thought this was a game. She thought he would keep letting it slide, that he was too polite, too mild-mannered to actually do anything about it. That's when he made the decision. He wasn't going to knock again. He wasn't going to leave another note. The next time her car was in his driveway, he was going to have it towed. And that's exactly what happened. The towing begins. Reggie Carter woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't a man who sought conflict, but he also wasn't a pushover. Blythe Vanderholt had pushed him too far, treating his property like an extension of her own, as if his driveway was a guest spot for her visitors and deliveries. Enough was enough. He made a decision. If Blythe parked in his driveway again, he wouldn't waste his breath knocking on her door. He wouldn't write another note, wouldn't call the HOA for their weak and useless courtesy emails. No, the next time she did it, he was going to have her car towed. But he didn't have to wait long. A familiar sight. That Friday evening, after a grueling day of teaching, Reggie pulled into his street expecting, hoping, to see his driveway empty. It wasn't. The silver Lexus RX sat dead center, perfectly angled as if mocking him. Not only that, another car, a sleek black BMW, was parked partially in front of his mailbox. It was clear she had company. Reggie clenched his jaw, shaking his head. He took out his phone and snapped a picture. This time, he didn't hesitate. He scrolled through his contacts and dialed the number he had saved just in case. Sunshine Towing. Sunshine Towing. How can I help you? I have a car illegally parked on my property, Reggie said, voice steady but firm. I need it removed. The woman on the other end took down the details. Do you have proof of ownership of the property? Yes, I do. All right, we'll send someone over. Should be there in about 20 minutes. Reggie thanked her, hung up, and leaned against his porch railing. He wasn't mad anymore. He was calm. Amused, even. Because this time, Blythe was going to learn that her entitlement had real consequences. The arrival of justice. The tow truck arrived faster than expected. A big burly man in a reflective vest stepped out and surveyed the situation. You the homeowner? He asked. Reggie nodded and handed over his deed. The driver barely glanced at it before looking at the Lexus. She parked here without permission. Yep. The driver let out a low whistle. Some people got nerve. He cracked his knuckles. All right, let's get her hooked up. Within minutes, the Lexus RX was being lifted onto the truck. Reggie leaned against his porch, watching as the metal clamps secured the tires. The engine rumbled as the vehicle tilted, its rear wheels lifted off the ground. The sight was oddly satisfying. Then, just as the tow truck started rolling forward, a scream pierced the air. Stop! What the hell are you doing? Blythe came storming out of her house, silk robe billowing behind her, wine glass still in hand. Her face twisted in fury as she sprinted barefoot down the driveway. The tow truck didn't stop. Blythe rushed toward the driver. Hey, you can't do this. That's my car. The driver barely looked at her. Talk to the property owner. She spun toward Reggie, face red, eyes wide with disbelief. Reggie, what is this? He folded his arms. You parked in my driveway. Again. You didn't even tell me, she shrieked. I didn't have to. His voice was calm, measured. I warned you enough times. Blythe gaped at him, like she couldn't comprehend what was happening. This is beyond petty, Reggie. No. What's petty is me coming home every day to find your car in my driveway, he shot back. The tow truck rumbled forward, the Lexus now fully secured. Blythe let out an enraged shriek and whipped out her phone. I'm calling the cops. You're going to pay for this. Reggie smiled. Go ahead. The cops arrive. 15 minutes later, 2 police officers pulled up. By then, the tow truck was long gone, and Blythe was pacing her driveway, phone clutched in her hand. One of the officers, a tall black man with sharp features, stepped out first. His partner, a shorter white woman, followed closely behind. "Ma'am, you called about a stolen vehicle?" the male officer asked. "Yes," Blythe said, gesturing wildly toward Reddy. "He had my car towed for no reason." The officer turned to Reddy, calm but professional. "Sir, is this true?" Reddy crossed his arms. "I had her car towed because she parked in my driveway without permission. I have proof." He pulled up the photos on his phone. The officer barely needed to see them before nodding. "Ma'am," the female officer said, turning to Blythe, "this isn't theft. He's within his rights to have unauthorized vehicles removed from his property." Blythe's jaw dropped. But, he didn't even ask me to move it first." The male officer arched an eyebrow. "Did he ask you in the past?" She hesitated. "Well, yes, but you ignored him." Blythe's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. He's just being vindictive." The officers exchanged a look. The male officer sighed, pulling out a notepad. "If you want your car back, ma'am, you'll need to go to Sunshine Towing and pay the fee." Blythe clenched her fists. "This isn't over." "Actually," Reggie said, a smirk playing on his lips, "it is. The fallout begins." Blythe might have thought she was winning, but the neighborhood had been watching. Word spread fast. By the next morning, neighbors were whispering. Some outright laughed when they saw Blythe's furious pacing on her porch, still seething over her towed car. One by one, people started reaching out to Reggie. "Man, I've been waiting for someone to do that for years," said his neighbor, Ander, shaking his head. "She pulled the same thing with me a while back. My God, she's been a menace for too long." Mrs. Donnelly from down the street sighed. "I had to repaint my mailbox twice because she kept reporting me to the HOA for chipping paint." Even people who never really spoke to Reggie before started showing their support. "I'll pitch in for the next tow if she tries it again," someone texted him. That was when Reggie realized he wasn't just standing up for himself. Blythe had made an enemy of the entire neighborhood. The next move. But Blythe wasn't the type to take a loss gracefully. No, she was already scheming her next move. And Reggie? He was ready. Because this wasn't just about a driveway anymore. This was war. The HOA strikes back. A storm was brewing. Reggie Carter knew one thing for certain. Blythe Vanderholt wasn't done. After getting her car towed, she had stormed back into her house, humiliated, furious, and undoubtedly plotting her revenge. Reggie wasn't concerned. Not yet. He had done everything by the book. He had warned her, documented everything, and followed through when she ignored him. But Blythe, she was the type of person who didn't know how to lose. And that's when she made her next move. The very next morning, Reggie found a letter in his mailbox. The violation letter. It was an official-looking envelope stamped with the Lakeland Lakes HOA logo, a logo Reggie had learned to ignore because, until now, they never caused him trouble. But when he opened it, he couldn't help but laugh. Notice of HOA violation. Dear Mr. Carter, it has come to our attention that your property is in violation of our community standards. Specifically, your garbage bins have been left out beyond the designated time frame. Your mailbox paint is showing signs of fading, which does not align with our aesthetic guidelines. Your front lawn appears to have overgrown patches that must be addressed within 7 days. Failure to comply may result in fines. Please address these issues immediately. Sincerely, Lakeland Lakes Homeowners Association. Reggie stared at the letter for a long moment. His garbage bins. He brought them in every garbage day, like clockwork. His mailbox. It had been the same color for 2 years. And his lawn. He literally mowed it 3 days ago. This wasn't random. This was Blythe. She wasn't just trying to get even. She was weaponizing the HOA against him. A game of petty chess. Reggie wasn't new to HOA politics. He knew exactly how this worked. The HOA board was stacked with people like Blythe, entitled, passive-aggressive homeowners who liked controlling everything, and the president of the HOA, a man named Richard Carmichael. And wouldn't you know it, Richard just happened to be one of Blythe's closest friends. Reggie smirked as he crumpled the letter. If Blythe wanted to play dirty, he was more than ready. The Community Whisper Network. Before taking action, Reggie did something smart. He let the neighborhood know what was happening. It started with a casual conversation with Andre, his neighbor 2 doors down. "Man, you won't believe what I just got in the mail," Reggie said, handing him the letter. Andre read it, snorted, and shook his head. "Let me guess. Blythe." "Of course," Reggie said. "She couldn't handle getting towed, so now she's trying to sick the HOA on me." Andre whistled. "Bro, she did the same thing to me last year. Reported my fence for being the wrong shade of beige." That's when it started. One by one, neighbors began coming forward with their own horror stories. She tried to fine me $100 for having a too bright front porch light. She got my elderly mom written up because our Christmas decorations were still up on January 3rd. She told me I couldn't have a basketball hoop in my driveway, even though my kids use it every day. Reggie realized something. Blythe had been abusing HOA rules for years. And now, people were done with her. A counterattack begins. The next thing Reggie did was prepare his response. HOAs thrived on paperwork. The only way to beat them at their own game was to drown them in it. Reggie drafted his own letter and sent it directly to the HOA board. "Dear Lakeland Lakes HOA, I recently received a notice regarding several alleged violations on my property. I am formally disputing these claims based on the following. Garbage bins. I have photographic evidence that my bins are removed in a timely manner. I am requesting specific dates and times when these violations were allegedly observed. Mailbox paint. The HOA has never issued a formal requirement for repainted mailboxes. I am requesting a written copy of this rule. Front lawn. I mow my lawn regularly, and my property is in compliance with all landscaping guidelines. If there is a specific measurement or photographic proof of an issue, I request to see it. Furthermore, I would like to formally request an investigation into selective enforcement of HOA policies. Several community members have expressed concerns about unfair treatment regarding HOA violations, particularly in cases related to board member relationships. I look forward to your response. Sincerely, Reginald Carter. The HOA board meeting from hell. The moment Reggie submitted that letter, things got interesting. A week later, a mandatory HOA meeting was announced. And Reggie? He made sure to be front and center. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a bland beige building that smelled of old coffee and stress. It was supposed to be a routine discussion about landscaping budgets and parking rules. But Reggie had different plans. When they opened the floor for concerns, he raised his hand. "I'd like to discuss my recent violation notice." The room went silent. Blythe sat stone-faced near the front. Richard Carmichael, the HOA president, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, this isn't the appropriate time." "Oh, I think it is," Reggie cut in smoothly, "because I'd like to know why my garbage bins, mailbox, and lawn are suddenly a problem after I had a certain board member's car legally towed." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Reggie continued, his voice loud and clear. "And while we're at it, I'd love to know how many other residents have received mysterious violations after getting on the wrong side of certain board members." More murmurs. And then, a voice from the back spoke up. He's right. It was Mrs. Donnelly, the elderly woman who had been harassed over her Christmas decorations. She stood up, crossing her arms. "I got 3 fines in a row after I refused to donate to the HOA's special fund last year." Then another voice. "She tried to fine me for wind chimes. And she reported my nephew for standing outside in a hoodie." One by one, neighbors began speaking out. And suddenly, Blythe's perfect little kingdom. It was crumbling. The final blow. Richard Carmichael looked pale. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. I think we should investigate. Reggie interrupted smoothly. And if we find that HOA rules have been selectively enforced against certain residents, maybe we should consider removing those responsible. Blythe shot up from her seat, red-faced and furious. This is harassment. Reggie leaned back, smiling. No, Blythe, he said. This is accountability. The room erupted in applause. The beginning of the end. By the end of the meeting, the HOA agreed to launch a review of selective enforcement. And Blythe, she stormed out. But the damage was done. Her power over the neighborhood was slipping fast. And Reggie, he was just getting started. The empire crumbles. A shattered illusion. Blythe Vanderholt had spent years weaving an intricate web of control over the Lakeland Lakes community. She had made herself the unofficial queen of the HOA, enforcing arbitrary rules, issuing petty fines, and using her influence to make life difficult for anyone who dared defy her. But after the disastrous HOA meeting, the foundation of her little empire had begun to crack. She wasn't untouchable anymore, and the entire neighborhood was watching her fall. The immediate fallout. The morning after the HOA meeting, Reggie sat on his porch with a fresh cup of coffee, enjoying the warm Florida air. And across the street, Blythe stood on her front lawn, seething. Her usual confident posture was gone. She kept looking around, shifting uncomfortably as neighbors walked past, people who used to be too scared to meet her eyes. Now they smirked at her, whispering under their breath. Reggie didn't have to say anything. He had already won the first battle. And Blythe, she knew it, but that didn't mean she was giving up. No, she was about to fight dirty. A smear campaign begins. It started small. At first, Reggie noticed side eyes from a few HOA loyalists, people who had been close to Blythe for years. Then, some of his mail went missing. His trash cans were mysteriously knocked over one morning. And then the flyers started appearing. Printed on glossy paper, they were taped to light poles, slid under mailboxes, and even pinned on the HOA bulletin board. Is this the kind of neighbor we want? Do we tow our neighbors' cars instead of speaking to them? Do we humiliate our fellow residents instead of fostering a sense of community? HOA board member Blythe Vanderholt has been UNFAIRLY targeted by one resident. Let's stand together and stop petty harassment. Reggie pulled the flyer off his mailbox, laughing to himself. Oh, she's desperate, he muttered. That same evening, Ander walked over, shaking his head. Man, she's really out here playing the victim. She can play whatever she wants, Reggie said, crumpling the flyer. She's still losing. Because what Blythe didn't know, the neighborhood was already turning against her. The backlash. Blythe's flyer campaign didn't have the effect she wanted. Instead of making Reggie look like the villain, it only made people angrier at her. By the next HOA meeting, something happened that had never occurred before. Residents showed up in record numbers. The usual half-empty clubhouse was packed, filled with homeowners who were done with Blythe's nonsense. And this time, Reggie didn't even have to say a word. Why is the HOA spending money on flyers to defend one board member? A woman named Linda asked, arms crossed. I didn't sign up for an HOA dictatorship. Another resident chimed in. We pay dues for community upkeep, not to fund someone's personal grudge. Blythe sat near the front, arms folded, jaw clenched tight. She was losing control, fast. And then came the final nail in the coffin. A middle-aged man stood up near the back. He adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. I'd like to make a motion, he said, voice carrying through the room. Blythe stiffened. I'd like to propose a vote for the removal of Blythe Vanderholt from the HOA board. The room went silent. For a moment, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the building. Then, a wave of murmurs. Blythe shot up from her chair. This is outrageous, she snapped. You can't do this. Actually, Richard Carmichael, the HOA president, muttered under his breath, "They can." And in that moment, Blythe knew she had lost. The vote that changed everything. By the end of the meeting, the HOA had officially voted to remove Blythe from the board. Not only that, a full audit of HOA fines and complaints was launched. Every fine she had issued, every petty rule she had enforced, every single resident she had targeted, it was all about to be exposed. And Blythe was out. She stormed out of the meeting, face red, hands shaking, practically hissing under her breath. As she passed Reggie, "This is your fault," she spat. Reggie took a sip of his water and grinned. "No, Blythe. This is your fault." The unraveling. Blythe's downfall didn't stop with the HOA. Once she lost her board position, it was as if the neighborhood turned on her overnight. People stopped responding to her emails. Neighbors ignored her when she walked by. Even her closest allies on the board distanced themselves. It got so bad that one day, a "For SALD" sign appeared in her yard. At first, people whispered, wondering if she was just bluffing. But then the moving trucks came. And just like that, Blythe Vanderholt was gone. Victory and reflection. The day after Blythe left, Reggie stepped outside, stretching in the warm Florida sun. For the first time in months, his driveway was empty. No silver Lexus RX. No passive-aggressive notes. No ridiculous HOA violations. Just peace. Ander walked over, grinning. "Dan, man, you really did it." Reggie smirked. She did it to herself. The two men stood there, watching as the last moving truck pulled away. "I gotta say," Ander chuckled, "I never thought anyone would take her down. She's been running this place for years." Reggie shrugged. Some people think they can get away with treating others like trash forever. Until they meet the wrong one. Ander finished, nodding. Reggie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lift off his shoulders. The fight was over. And he had won. The lesson. Some people live their whole lives pushing others around, thinking there will never be consequences. They manipulate. They intimidate. They abuse their power. And for a while, they get away with it. Until they cross the wrong person. And then, their whole world crumbles. The final reckoning. A hollow victory. For weeks after Blythe Vanderholt's dramatic downfall, Lakeland Lakes was eerily peaceful. No more unnecessary HOA fines. No more passive-aggressive emails. No more entitled smirks from Blythe as she sipped her overpriced Chardonnay on her porch. Reggie Carter should have felt completely victorious. And in many ways, he did. But something nagged at him. Despite Blythe's forced resignation from the HOA board, despite the neighborhood cheering her downfall, despite the "For SALD" sign standing like a tombstone in her front yard, Reggie couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Blythe wasn't the type to leave without a final shot. And as it turned out, she was saving her worst for last. The lawsuit that no one saw coming. It happened on a bright Monday morning. Reggie had just finished making his morning coffee when he heard a knock on the door. Not an aggressive knock. Not a neighborly one, either. It was the kind of knock that sent a chill down his spine. Cautiously, he opened the door, and standing there was a man in a cheap suit, holding a stack of papers. "Reginald Carter." "Yeah. You've been served." The man thrust the papers into his hand and walked away without another word. Reggie stared at the documents, brows furrowing as he flipped through the pages. And then he saw it. Blythe Vanderholt was suing him. The claims against him. The lawsuit was as delusional as Blythe herself. She was claiming emotional distress from having her car towed, defamation due to public humiliation, harassment for targeting her with unfair complaints. She wanted $50,000 in damages. $50,000. Reggie let out a slow breath, shaking his head. This woman is insane. He grabbed his phone and dialed Ander. "You are not going to believe this," he muttered the moment Ander picked up. "Let me guess," Ander said, already chuckling. Blythe is pulling one last stunt. She's suing me. Dead silence. Then, Andra burst out laughing. Oh man, I knew she was crazy. But this, it's not funny, Reggie muttered. She's really trying to take this to court. Andra's laughter faded into a thoughtful hum. So what's your move? Reggie clenched his jaw. He already knew. Bringing in reinforcements. Reggie wasn't an idiot. He knew lawsuits, even ridiculous ones, couldn't be ignored. So he did what any smart person would do. He lawyered up. Enter Melissa Graves, one of the best civil attorneys in Lakeland. A no-nonsense woman in her 40s, Melissa was known for tearing apart frivolous lawsuits before they even made it to trial. When Reggie walked into her office and handed her the lawsuit, she barely skimmed it before letting out an amused huff. Oh, this is adorable. Reggie raised an eyebrow. Adorable. Melissa leaned back in her chair, twirling a pen between her fingers. I see cases like this all the time. It's a desperation move. She knows she lost, so now she's grasping at straws. So what do we do? Melissa smirked. We bury her. The countersuit. Melissa didn't just defend Reggie. She went on the attack. Within 2 weeks, she filed a countersuit against Blythe for harassment, documented through excessive HOA complaints. Defamation, due to the community-wide smear campaign. Malicious prosecution, because her lawsuit was obviously a revenge ploy. And she didn't stop there. Melissa dug into Blythe's HOA history. Turns out, Blythe had been misusing HOA funds for years. Filing personal complaints using HOA resources, issuing fake fines to people she didn't like, even pocketing HOA money for community improvements that never actually happened. Melissa took that information straight to the HOA board. And what did they do? They turned on Blythe. The community versus Blythe. By the time Blythe's lawsuit reached the first hearing, she was already losing. Her own former allies were testifying against her. Richard Carmichael, the HOA president, tried to save himself by throwing her under the bus. She acted on her own. The board had no idea she was misusing funds. Another former board member chimed in. We trusted her, and she took advantage of that trust. It's embarrassing. Even neighbors who once feared her were now lining up to testify against her. Blythe sat at the defendant's table, eyes burning with humiliation as the community she once ruled tore her apart. Melissa leaned toward Reggie and whispered, She's done. The judge's ruling. It took 3 weeks for the final ruling. The judge dismissed Blythe's lawsuit entirely. But it got better. Because Reggie's countersuit was a success. The judge awarded him $25,000 in damages for harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. And the best part, Blythe was ordered to pay his legal fees, which meant that her petty attempt to get even had just cost her tens of thousands of dollars. The end of Blythe Vanderholt. Blythe tried one last stunt before leaving Lakeland Lakes for good. She held a moving sale, except nobody showed up. The neighbors boycotted it completely. In the end, she was forced to sell most of her expensive furniture for pennies. On her last day in the neighborhood, Reggie stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching as her final moving truck pulled away. And just before she disappeared for good, she turned and glared at him. A glare filled with rage, humiliation, and defeat. Reggie? He just smiled. Because Blythe Vanderholt wasn't just moving away. She was running. And she would never, ever come back. Lessons learned. Bullies always think they're untouchable, until they push the wrong person. When a community stands together, even the worst tyrants can fall. And sometimes, karma isn't just poetic. It's legal. Reggie had won. And Lakeland Lakes would never be ruled by another HOA tyrant again. The legacy of a fallen tyrant, the aftermath of war. The neighborhood of Lakeland Lakes had changed. Not overnight. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. But the shift was undeniable. Ever since Blythe Vanderholt had been run out of the HOA, The atmosphere was different. The air felt lighter, as if the entire community had collectively exhaled, finally free from the iron grip of a woman who had ruled through intimidation, petty fines, and backhanded power plays. And yet, even as her house sat empty, a lingering question remained. Would Lakeland Lakes ever truly be free of her influence? Reggie Carter had won the battle. But the war? It wasn't quite over yet. An empty house with a dark history. Blythe's luxurious, two-story Spanish-style home had been on the market for weeks. Yet, strangely, no one wanted to buy it. Not because of the price. Not because of the location. Because of the stories. People whispered about the curse of 405 Sunridge Lane. It was bad real estate juju. Neighbors swapped stories. You know, she once tried to fine a man for having an unapproved garden gnome. She called security on a group of kids for playing basketball in their own driveway. That woman had it coming, but man, I wouldn't want to live in her house. And so, week after week, the house sat empty. It became a reminder, a symbol of what happened when someone thought they were bigger than the community they lived in, the unexpected visitor. One evening, Reggie was watering his lawn when he noticed something strange. A black sedan had pulled up to Blythe's old house. Not a moving truck, not a realtor. Just one car. A man stepped out. He was tall, clean-cut, and dressed in a navy blue suit, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a corporate boardroom, not on a quiet suburban street. Reggie narrowed his eyes. Something about the way the man stared at the house made him uneasy. Like he wasn't just looking at it. Like he was studying it. And then, as if sensing Reggie's gaze, the man turned and locked eyes with him. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, the man nodded once, got back into his car, and drove away. Reggie watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Something wasn't right. The HOA's last power move. The very next morning, a letter appeared in Reggie's mailbox. He sighed. Not this again. But when he opened it, he frowned. Dear Mr. Carter, we hope you are enjoying the recent improvements to the Lakeland Lakes community. We wanted to inform you that the HOA has been approached by a potential new buyer for the property at 405 Sunridge Lane. The prospective buyer has requested a private meeting with select residents before finalizing their offer. As a respected member of the community, we invite you to attend. HOA meeting, Friday, 6:00 p.m. at the Community Clubhouse. We appreciate your cooperation. Sincerely, Lakeland Lakes HOA Board. Reggie read the letter twice. Something about it didn't sit right. Why would a buyer want a private meeting with residents? More importantly, why did the HOA care so much about who bought Blythe's house? It felt suspicious. And so, Reggie decided to show up. The meeting that changed everything. The clubhouse was full when Reggie arrived. And at the front sat the man from the black sedan. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket, and gave a charming, practiced smile. Good evening, he said, his voice smooth as silk. My name is Elliot Vanderholt. Vanderholt. The room stilled. Reggie's jaw tightened. This wasn't just any buyer. This was Blythe's son. The Vanderholt agenda. Elliot spoke with the kind of effortless confidence that came from money, power, and being used to getting his way. I know my mother had differences with some of you, he began, and I won't pretend to defend every decision she made. Someone snorted loudly from the back. Elliot smiled tightly. However, she was deeply invested in this community, and I'd like to continue her legacy by buying her home and returning to Lakeland Lakes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elliot wasn't just buying the house. He was planning to move in. And more than that, he was a corporate attorney, with deep pockets and a grudge. Reggie's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a home purchase. This was revenge. The pushback. A woman from the front row, a resident named Gloria Watson, raised a hand. With all due respect, she said, Your mother was a nightmare. Why should we believe you be any different? Elliot's smile didn't waver. I have no intention of reviving her particular leadership style, he said smoothly. I simply want to live in my childhood home. Surely no one here has a problem with that. People shifted uncomfortably. Because technically, they couldn't stop him from buying the house. And yet, Reggie could feel it. The neighborhood didn't want him here. They had fought too hard to get rid of Blythe. Now her son wanted to slide back in under a different name. Not happening. The community stands together. Reggie stood up. All eyes turned to him. You say you just want to live here, he said slowly. No power plays. No HOA involvement. Just a simple, quiet life. Elliot nodded. That's right. Reggie tilted his head. Then why were you looking at the house like it was a chessboard when you pulled up last night? Silence. Elliot's charming facade cracked for a split second. Then he laughed. A cold, empty laugh. I can't control how people interpret things, Mr. Carter. No, Reggie agreed, folding his arms. But I know what I saw. And in that moment, the room turned against Elliot. One by one, neighbors started voicing their concerns. Elliot tried to defend himself, but it was too late. Lakeland Lakes had learned its lesson. And when the meeting ended, the HOA unanimously voted to block Elliot from joining the board. No influence, no control, no power, just another homeowner. If he even bought the house. The legacy of the battle. Elliot never did move in. Within a month, the house was sold to a retired couple instead. And just like that, the Vanderholt era ended. For good. Final thoughts. Some families never learn. But some communities refuse to let history repeat itself. And that's exactly what happened at Lakeland Lakes. Because when people stand together, no tyrant can survive. The true end. A peace earned, not given. For the first time in years, Lakeland Lakes finally felt like a neighborhood again. People could park their cars without fear of getting towed for no reason. Kids could play outside without their parents worrying about HOA complaints. Residents weren't afraid of ridiculous fines being slipped into their mailboxes. Blythe Vanderholt had been the storm, and now the skies were clear. The last attempt. Even though Elliot Vanderholt had lost his bid to reclaim control, he still tried to buy his mother's house. But the community rejection hit harder than expected. Word spread fast, and suddenly the HOA wasn't so willing to work with him. The board that once protected Blythe was now scared of public backlash. They weren't going to risk another neighborhood war, not after what happened to his mother. So, 2 weeks later, the house went to another buyer. And Elliot, he left Lakeland Lakes for good, just like his mother. Reggie's final act. One warm Saturday morning, Reggie stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching as the new homeowners moved in. A retired couple named Mark and Eleanor Stevens, the kind of people who just wanted a quiet place to enjoy their golden years. They weren't interested in HOA power struggles. They weren't interested in running the neighborhood. They just wanted to plant flowers and feed birds. And that was exactly what Lakeland Lakes needed. A message from the past. That evening, as Reggie was closing his front door, he noticed an envelope taped to his mailbox. No name, no return address, just a plain, white envelope. Frowning, he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, and scrawled in elegant cursive handwriting was one final message. You think you won, but you just made enemies you can't see. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. There was no signature, no proof of who wrote it, but Reggie knew. He smirked, crumpling the note and tossing it into the trash. Whatever you say, Blythe. Because threats only work on people who are scared. And Reggie Carter wasn't scared of her. Not anymore. The true end. Life at Lakeland Lakes moved on. Blythe's reign became a cautionary tale, a warning passed down to new homeowners. The HOA learned its lesson. No more unchecked power. No more secret fines. And no more Vanderholts. And as for Reggie, he lived his life in peace. No more battles. No more HOA wars. Just quiet evenings, good neighbors, and a driveway that was finally his. Final thoughts. Sometimes the worst tyrants don't wear crowns. They wear HOA name tags. But like all bullies, they fall eventually. Because no one is invincible. Not even a Karen with a clipboard. And in the end, the neighborhood always wins.